"Act like you're mine," the millionaire surgeon murmured, and the words hooked into Lila Moreno's chest like a grappling line. She could never have guessed that sentence would drag her into a maze of family secrets, elegant brutality, and the kind of love that blooms only after it's been frozen and starved. The wedding was a glittering dream she'd hoped might feel like a second chance. Crystal chandeliers shimmered like frost in midair. Violins sang beneath the clink of flutes, and high society moved in a slow, choreographed waltz of laughter and diamonds. But for Lila, who'd come because the bride, her childhood best friend, had begged her, every light was a spotlight showing the seams of her off-the-rack dress. She held herself tall, pretending she belonged among the peacocks and their plumage, telling herself this would be a night of hope, a reminder that even if life had knocked her down, she could still stand in rooms like this. It took minutes for the hope to crumple. She chose a table near the exit, a quiet island, far from the silk tides and satin whirlpools. Pressed linens and golden cutlery gleamed around her like museum pieces you're not allowed to touch. Under the sharp scent of peonies and expensive perfume, she caught whispers that pricked like nettles. "Did you see her dress? Like something the help would wear. Who invited her?" Embarrassing. Dreadfully alone. She stared at her water glass until it became a little silver moon. Her cheeks burned. She tried to remember the friend who had meant it when she'd said, "You're family. You'll always be family." But memory doesn't hold a room together, not when strangers are cutting it apart thread by thread. A woman in a gown that hissed like a reprimand through the air glided toward her. The lady's diamonds swung like pendulums, measuring out the seconds before the insult. "Oh, sweetheart," she cooed, the kindness in her tone so sharp it could open a vein. "Are you lost?" "The service corridor is around back." Lila swallowed the retort that tried to leap up. Her throat felt tight and dry. The floor seemed to roll like a ship's deck. She braced her hands on the chair, preparing to stand, to flee, to pretend the night had never happened. In the moment before flight, a shadow blanketed her table. He sat without asking, his presence immediately taking up oxygen. Impeccably cut midnight blue suit, a jaw chiseled like the edge of a coin, and eyes, cool, pale slate, that noticed everything and gave nothing back. Lila recognized him from gossip columns she pretended not to glance at while waiting for the bus. Dr. Cassian Hale. The Hale of Hale Medical, the surgeon whose icy precision had built an empire and a mythology. He didn't spare the socialite a glance. He leaned in, just enough that Lila could smell understated cedar and clean skin and something that reminded her of thunderstorms rolling in over the bay. "Pretend you're with me," he murmured, voice pitched for her alone. Firm, unhurried. A lifeline thrown with a surgeon's aim. "What?" Lila breathed, stunned. His gaze flicked toward the far corner where an exquisitely dressed older woman, his aunt, if the family resemblance in the cheekbones meant anything, steered a porcelain-faced heiress their way like a tug pulling a yacht. "My aunt is staging an ambush. She wants a wife picked by dawn. You, Miss Moreno," she whispered. "You look like you could use a rescue, Miss Moreno. Help me navigate this aquarium of sharks tonight, and I'll return the favor." It wasn't a grand bargain. It was a small, strange raft in a storm surge. But she was drowning, and he knew it. She nodded before the panic could argue. "Good," he said softly, and the corners of his mouth tipped up, not into gentleness, but into something like satisfaction. He set his palm on the small of her back, not tentative, not possessive, just decided. The heat of it lit every wire in her skin. Conversations flared and faltered as if someone had dimmed the lights. The woman who'd just skewered Lila with a smile slammed her jaw shut and drifted off like a leaf caught by a new current. Heads turned. There he is. And her. A current rose around them, crackling. Lila's heartbeat pounded hard enough to bruise. She didn't know what she'd signed up for, only that something had begun, the part in every story when you know the rails are about to end and you'll have to trust momentum to carry you. Somewhere, in the defiant corner of her mind, she thought, if this were a video, if I had 1,000 lives watching me right now, I'd tell them, don't blink, don't breathe. This is the moment everything shifts. 3 mornings later, the bell over the door at Harbor Brew, her cafe, stuttered out its cheery jingle. Gray morning light filtered through the smudged windows, painting the scuffed tile with pale rectangles. The smell of burnt espresso and cinnamon scones lived in the walls. Lila was scrubbing a table, counting tips that would never quite be enough, when the room inhaled and went silent. Dr. Cassian Hale stood in the doorway, sleek as a panther that had strayed into a dog park. A charcoal suit draped him like a sentence that ended with a period, not a question mark. The regulars, who could be counted on to heckle anything and everyone, stared as if Lake Michigan had walked in. He crossed the room in measured strides. "Miss Moreno," he said, and her name sounded like it had a first-class ticket. "We need to talk." He led her to a corner booth. Vinyl groaned under his weight. He didn't ask for coffee. He didn't ask how she was. "I have a problem," he said briskly, like he was opening a chart. "My board is pressing for the optics of stability. They believe a settled personal life calms investors' nerves and persuades donors to open their wallets wider. It's absurd, but it's the water I swim in." His eyes held hers, cool and unblinking. "I require a partner for social and corporate events for the next 6 months. Someone poised, intelligent, not dazzled by money. Someone who can play a role with conviction." "Why, tell me?" The question came out as a whisper. Her skin prickled. She had the feeling of standing on a trapdoor, the hinges just beginning to creak. "Because you, Miss Moreno, met chaos with spine." He said it as if it were a simple diagnosis. "At the wedding, you were out of your depth, but not out of your dignity. You took the deal I offered and you didn't flinch. You're a pragmatist. And before you ask, yes." He lifted a hand slightly, conceding the next question before she could voice it. "I had you looked into." Cold moved through her veins and settled in her knuckles. "You what?" "I'm thorough," he said, not apologizing. "Your mother's illness. The bills like sandbags on your chest. The 2 jobs that are not enough. I have the resources to change those facts." He named a number. It wasn't money. It was breath. It was time. He laid out the rest without theatrics, the way you'd explain a procedure. "I will clear your family's medical debt. I will have your mother transferred to Hale Medical Center under the care of the most capable team I can assemble. Her care will cost you nothing, not now, not later." Lila's hand shook. A vision flashed, the relief on her mother's face if she could just say, "It's handled." Then the hook. "In exchange," he said, "you will play the part of my fiancé for 6 months." He did not soften the word, fiancé. It hit like a cymbal crash. Somewhere in the back of the cafe, the espresso machine sighed. The door chimed as someone left and no one noticed. Lila whispered, "You think I can pretend I belong in your world?" "I build illusions for a living," Cassian said coolly. "My job is to make art invisible, to render the false indistinguishable from truth. This is no different, only messier." Her pulse thudded in her throat. A sticky thread of desperation and salvation wound around her, tightening. "You'll be paid," he added, as if the money were merely a footnote in a contract both of them had already signed with their eyes. He reached into his jacket, withdrew a leather folder, and slid it across. "My attorneys drafted something. Read it carefully." She skimmed lines that felt like handcuffs disguised as ribbon. Non-disclosure, behavioral clauses, termination. A clause in Article 7, Section B inched up like a snake. No emotional entanglements, no romantic delusions, no attachments. "This is business," he said, voice low enough that she felt it more than heard it. "Nothing more. My driver will collect you tomorrow at noon. Be ready." He stood. For a second, he looked almost sorry. Then the mask settled, and he left her with the folder and a decision that felt both impossible and already made. By the next afternoon, her tiny apartment was a collection of packed boxes and quiet ghosts. The sleek black car waiting at the curb reflected the winter sky like a dark river. It ferried her from chipped dishes and overdue notices to the glass and steel precision of Hale Spire, the tallest building knifing into Harborview's slate-blue horizon. Cassian's penthouse claimed the top 2 floors like a condor's eyrie, stunning, remote, indifferent to the crawl of traffic below. Inside, polished marble gleamed like ice. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus and expensive silence. A severe woman in her late 50s opened the door before Lila could knock. Her bun was tight enough to pull her features into careful lines. "I am Mrs. Whitcomb, Dr. Hale's head of household," she announced, each syllable ironed flat. Her glance took in Lila's scuffed suitcase and the thrift store coat she'd kept too long. "The doctor is in surgery. I'll show you to your quarters." Lila followed across a museum of minimalism, pale stone, black steel, a single abstract painting that looked like a wound slowly closing. The penthouse was all view and distance, glass walls curving around a sky that felt close enough to smudge. Her bedroom perched at the far end of a hallway lined with framed black and white photographs. No people, only bridges and wild coasts, storms captured and tamed. Mrs. Whitcomb opened a door. The room was beautiful, all soft grays and pale wood, the bed wide enough to erase the memory of the narrow twin Lila had grown up in. Another door revealed a closet the size of her old living room crammed with garments, deep emeralds, liquid silvers, blacks that absorbed light like velvet space. Shoes glowed on shelves, bags, small and smug, perched like birds. "Dr. Hale had stylists curate a wardrobe," Mrs. Whitcomb said. The slightest uptilt of her chin acknowledged that none of this would feel like a gift. "You represent him now. You will be expected to look the part." When the apartment's hush closed around her that night, sleep became a foreign language. She gave up, barefoot on cool floors, drawn by the city's glow pouring through 40-foot windows. The kitchen was dim, lit by the reflection of traffic like strange constellations moving. Then his silhouette cut the glass. He stood in profile, shirtless, the moon drawing lines down his back and catching the planes of his shoulders. He held a glass, water within it rippling the city into shards. Lila's inhalation snagged the quiet. He turned at the small sound. His eyes, washed of every pretense by darkness, found her. "Insomnia?" he asked, voice a low rasp that made something deep in her answer before her mouth did. She nodded. He set the glass down with a whisper of crystal against stone and walked toward her like he wasn't in a rush, and like he always arrived exactly where he intended. She felt the counter at her back, his palms planted beside her, caging her in without touching her. "Or maybe," he said, breath warming the shell of her ear, "you wondered if the contract forgot to mention a few benefits." Heat radiated from him in the cool room. She could smell soap and salt and something thunderous. Her heart beat too close to her skin. His mouth hovered near her cheek, a proximity so charged it scorched. "Don't mistake this for anything more," he murmured, a silky threat threaded with a dare. The moment stretched, the wire pulled to singing, then he pushed away, a smile like a cut blooming in his mouth. "Remember the rules, Lila. Don't get attached." He took his water and left her trembling, breath snagging, humiliation and arousal pouring through the same gates in ways that made no sense. For the first time she understood. The danger wasn't society's cameras or contracts. It was the man who wrote the rules and built the fortress around them both. Their first test arrived like a headline. The Hale Medical Foundation's charity gala, Harborview's glittering cathedral to philanthropy, where fortunes introduced causes to each other and made sure the photographers were watching. Cassian, in the mirror's reflection as he fixed his cufflinks, said, "Genevieve Archer will be there." Lila recognized the name from whispers and glossy photos, the ex-fiancée. Old money like worn leather, a jawline taught to smile at galas. "Your task is simple," he said. "Convince every person in that room, especially Genevieve, that you are the only woman in my line of sight." He walked her to the closet, bypassed elegant restraint for a single bold flare, and pulled out a scarlet gown that poured like wildfire. He held it out, no request, only knowledge. When she walked back out wearing it, the air changed temperature. He glanced up and stilled, then looked again, devouring the line of her throat, the dress hugging her curves, then returned to her face, as if checking whether the transformation was allowed. He stepped closer, adjusted a strap that needed nothing, his fingertips leaving a heat-branded path. "Perfect," he said roughly. "Let them look. Let them know." The words were a script, and something else. At the gala, Chandeliers scattered light like confetti. The orchestra played something elegant and sharp. With Cassian's hand firm on her back, Lila felt the gaze of the room shift from dismissal to calculation to envy. He moved through people like a tide. No, like a captain showing off the lines of a ship no one else could afford. He was stopped by Chairman Patel, the hospital board's iron spine. Lila waited by the champagne fountain, its bubbling laughter just a little too loud. Genevieve Archer arrived like winter sunlight, cool, exquisite, dangerous in ways you didn't feel until your bones ached. "Enjoying the view from the top?" she said, saccharine sweet. "Careful. It's a longer way down than it looks." "I'm sorry," Lila said, tilting her head like a lady who'd learned to deal her own cards. "Have we met?" "We don't need to have," Genevieve purred. "I know Cassian's type. He craves a project, a new shine. But he tires quickly, I would know." Before Lila could retort, an arm banded around her waist and pulled her back against a chest she'd begun to recognize by scent, by heat, by the way her pulse leaped when it neared. "Genevieve," Cassian said, voice edged to a blade, "meet my fiancé." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and pressed his mouth to Lila's temple. Not a peck, not polite, but a mark, as if he'd written something across her skin that only Genevieve could read. He looked down at Lila afterward, the protectiveness in his eyes shockingly unmasked. It wasn't for anyone else, it was for her. "Dance?" he asked softly, though they were already moving toward the floor. He held her as if he had memorized the exact weight of her. His palm at the small of her back felt like a claim lodged where she could pretend not to notice it later. When the music climbed, the world narrowed to the scrape of violin bows and the press of his thumb at her spine, and the realization that the lie she'd agreed to perform had taken on unsettling truth. A week later, his world became a stage for a different kind of theater, an art auction, where fortunes fluttered as numbered paddles, where silence became punctuation between bids. Lila, who had studied art until the money ran out, drifted between canvases with a hunger that surprised her. She stopped at a moody landscape, field swallowing sky, a path rolling toward a storm, and said, almost to herself, "This one knows something." Cassian glanced, filed it away, and said nothing. When the painting came up, the bidding became a duel. Cassian raised his paddle at intervals, clean, unflustered. A man 3 rows ahead, older, eyes oiled with appetite, countered with a little smirk each time. Lila recognized the name from financial pages, Rowan Blackwood, a developer with a talent for turning communities into ash and profit. The price climbed. Cassian lifted his paddle and then paused. He looked at Lila. The smallest shake of his head, he withdrew. The gavel fell. Sold to Rowan Blackwood. Lila's disappointment was small compared to the nausea that rose when Blackwood ambled toward them during a lull. "Dr. Hale," he said, nodding as if they'd met once at the Devil's poker table. Then his eyes moved to Lila and lingered like a stain. "Exquisite taste, on the canvas and otherwise. Perhaps we could discuss art, somewhere quieter." The temperature in the air changed. Cassian did not look at Rowan. He stepped closer to Lila, fingers threading at the nape of her neck, the touch intimate in a way that lit panic and something else deep in her. He turned her face toward his and kissed her. It was not a polite mask. It was not the performative temple kiss from the gala. It was raw and hungry and, yes, possessive. It announced, in the language of heat, what his eyes had already threatened. "Not yours, mine." Conversations dropped 3 decibels. Lila's thoughts fell away like paper in a fire. Her hands clutched at his jacket to steady herself. And he took more, deeper, until the room did not exist. When he pulled back, he looked into her like he was capable of reading signs no one else could see. "We're leaving," he said, voice ground down to gravel. The car was a cocoon of silence. Harborview blurred past in dark smears of neon. She stared at the city, at the way rain glazed the streets. When she finally found her voice, it came out thin. "What was that?" The garage swallowed them. He cut the engine. The sudden quiet was a pressure chamber. "No one," he said, and the words were quiet but weapon-edged. disrespects what is mine." The sentence should have hit her like a slammed door, and it did. Some part of her flinched. But beneath the instinctive recoil, something traitorous and warm spiraled outward. He had defended her in a way that was all teeth and no apology. Danger, rescue, a vexing combination she didn't know whether to push away or step into. A storm rolled in days later, as if the night needed a metaphor. Wind moaned around the hail spire like a grieving animal. Rain attacked the windows until the towers beyond blurred into soft-edged ghosts. Then the lights went with a sigh, leaving the penthouse a dark cathedral of glass and shadow. "Stay put," Cassian said from the other side of the room, and his voice cut the dark like a blade. A slice of white light appeared as he swung his phone's flashlight, found candles, and set small constellations of flame. The shadows leaped and softened. The place, which normally felt like a museum of cool, pulled in on itself and became human. He poured whiskey that glowed like liquid amber as he handed her a glass. Their fingers brushed, quick and too long. They sat in the candle's low gold, the storm making conversation seem frivolous. Finally, he said, "You don't fear storms." She thought of childhood nights when the roof leaked into pots, and her mother had told stories about the sky dragging furniture around. "No," Lila said. "They sound like change." "How is she?" Lila asked, surprising herself with the directness. "Honestly," he slid into a voice he wore like a lab coat. "Her vitals are stable. The new meds are promising. The oncology team is cautiously optimistic." Then, softer, "You miss her." "Every day," Lila whispered. Talk wandered. She asked about the scalpel faith he needed to wake every morning and put his hands on lives. He asked about the art she had abandoned when rent cost more than color. The whiskey turned confessional. Courage and foolishness share a wall, and she climbed over. What happened with Genevieve? His jaw hardened. The candle flame cast a little trembling blade of shadow along it. Silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, it was clipped at the ends, like something amputated. "She cheated," he said, "with my best friend. He was supposed to stand beside me on my wedding day." He swallowed the rest of his whiskey and winced, not from the burn, from memory. "It wasn't the act," he went on, voice scraping up from somewhere he didn't go often. "It was the long worship of a lie. The months I smiled at two people who thought I was a fool. The feeling of being a ledger entry, an obstacle, a bank account with a heartbeat." He looked at her. The surgeon's eyes could be glass cold, but now they were human, wounded. "I swore," he said softly, "never to let anyone close enough to inflict that again." She didn't plan to touch him. Her hand moved on its own. She set it over his on the table. The air changed electrical. He flipped his palm, laced their fingers, leaned in. There was no smirk, no irony, no mockery in him. Only need, only relief. Only the simple, terrifying fact of being seen and wanting to be. His lips neared hers, and the world cracked apart. Thunder collapsed above them, a cannonade that rattled the windows and their bones. Both of them jerked back, startled into someone else's bodies. The spell fell and shattered like sugar glass. Cassian stood abruptly. The cool slid back over him like a sealed gown. "It's late," he said, not looking at her. "Get some sleep." He left her with the candle and the almost kiss. There are some promises you live on precisely because they aren't kept. For days, the unspoken hung in the air like perfume and ghosted every room. They circled each other with new wariness. He buried himself deeper in work. She learned the art of being present and invisible at once. The call came like bad weather you taste in your mouth before it arrives. Her mother had developed a severe post-treatment infection. ICU, high risk, immediate intervention, or the odds would turn ugly fast. Lila's panic made the penthouse unfamiliar. She couldn't find words. He found her. One glance at her face, and every polished edge in him dropped. "She's in good hands," he said, already unbuttoning his sleeves, already moving. "But I'm going in. I'll scrub in, get to the hospital, now." The sterile brightness of the waiting area turned her skin translucent. She paced grooves into the white floor, listening to clocks, to the squeak of shoes, to the sound a mother's breath makes when a machine helps it along. She realized the hospital would need documents, the durable power of attorney her mother had mentioned. In the blind panic, she made a call she would not have dared under clear skies. He picked up on the first ring, and his voice was a steady rope. "Lila, tell me. I need the legal folder. It's at your place. I can't—" "In my office," he cut in. "Behind the abstract painting. There's a safe. Code 1815. Waterloo." A flash, a strange vulnerability under the clinical logistics. He loved Napoleonic history, she would learn later, because defeat can teach better than victory. "Take the blue folder. Only the blue one. Touch nothing else." The line died. She threw herself into a cab that surfed the city's angry honking. In the silent office, the abstract painting slid aside to reveal steel. Her fingers shook as she entered the code. The safe opened like a mouth. Documents arranged with surgical order, velvet boxes that knew the shape of old money. The blue folder sat exactly where he said. Beneath it, a black one with no label except a small typed tag. The name made her skin go cold. "Rowan Blackwood, you promised. Only the blue one." And yet her fingers were traitors. She pulled the black folder out and unfolded a private investigation that read like a graveyard. Company after family-owned company, corner stores that made neighborhoods, factories that gave towns a heartbeat, gutted, assets stripped, land flipped, casualties counted in foreclosed homes and folded dreams. And then a name that made her inhale sharply as if punched. Archer Fabrics, Genevieve's family business. Hands trembling, she flipped to the back. Tucked into a sleeve, a single note on Hale letterhead, handwritten, jagged, not a statement, a question that read like a confession. Did he ruin her father's company? Is that why she left me? The world tipped. The story Cassian had told, clean, cruel, simple, wasn't the whole. He had not just been a man betrayed, he had been a man pulling at threads to see the whole pattern. He had wondered whether Genevieve's flight had been less about his failure and more about a man like Rowan Blackwood tightening a financial noose. Who was Cassian Hale, really? The iceman in tailored wool? Or the man whose private miseries included a search for justice no one else knew about? By the time Cassian found her in the waiting room again, scrubs exchanged for a crisp shirt he had thrown on after hours under the hot lights, her mother was stable. "She did well," he said quietly. "The next day matters, but I'm optimistic." "Thank you," Lila said, and the words felt too small, too stupid. Gratitude that large has no language. "I don't know how to—" "It's part of our arrangement," he said, reflexively erecting the walls between them. That defense, the one where he turned the personal into policy, used to keep her safe from hope. It only made her angry now. "We need to talk," she said, and he went very still at the steel in her voice. "Not about my mother, about Blackwood." His eyes sharpened, the warmth gone. "You violated my trust," he said, low and dangerous, like a warning showing bone. "I gave you one instruction." "And you left out a few details," she countered, the courage of someone with nothing left to lose lending her spine. She set the black folder on the chair between them. "You told me Genevieve betrayed you. You didn't tell me you suspected she was pushed. By ruin engineered by the man who leered at me at an auction you let him win. You didn't tell me you've been investigating him. Are you protecting her? Do you still love her?" The question hung there, ugly and necessary. He stared at the folder, at the name, then at Lila. For once, he looked undone. "No," he said finally, the word heavy with the relief and grief of it. "I don't love her anymore. But I owe her. I was cold, self-involved, obsessed with the work." I shrugged at her family's panic. "She didn't leave because I wasn't enough. She left because I made her life a room she couldn't breathe in. The investigation started because I needed to know if my failure had met hers at the same ugly crossroads." Lila's anger folded into something more complicated. It wasn't a vengeful man before her. It was one who had turned guilt into a weight he wore under armor. She looked at the folder's grim parade of victims, at the pain that rhymed with her own, families ground under a developer's boot because he could. "You want justice for what he did to her," she said. I want justice for what men like him do to people like my family. Let's stop talking about it. She picked up the folder and held it like a weapon. Let's ruin him. He stared. This was not how he'd written the script. She wasn't asking to be shepherded into safety. She wasn't a prop. She was handing him an alliance. For the first time, his smile was unguarded and a little dangerous. "All right, Moreno," he said. "Let's go to work." The penthouse transformed. Blueprints and spreadsheets spread like battle maps on the long, polished table. Post-its sprouted in bright constellations across the glass. They studied Blackwood, his appetites, his patterns, the way his greed and his libido pulled him like puppet strings. The trap sprang fully formed in the quiet between them. A private investment summit Blackwood would be hosting. Select, secretive, the sort of room where deals get made with verbal handshakes and winked assurances. Lila would become Lila Beaumont, sole heiress to a not-yet-public European tech sale, wired with inherited fortune and bored curiosity. She'd dangle a 9-figure investment. He'd lean in too far. Cassian would listen from a surveillance van parked a block away. Lawyers and techs tuned to every word through a micro-earpiece barely visible beneath the sweep of Lila's hair. "He's expecting a gray-haired shark," Cassian said, pacing, his brain working like an engine you could feel through the floorboards. "He'll never see you coming. You are his blind spot, young, beautiful, and, in his mind, naive. He underestimates what he wants to own." The night of the summit stretched thin and electric. Lila, in an emerald gown with an old money neckline and a slit sharp enough to warn and invite at once, walked into a hotel ballroom that smelled of truffles and ambition. She felt the earpiece warm against her skin, and his voice threaded through it, a steady presence at her nape. "You've got this," he murmured. "When you get nervous, talk numbers. Numbers are a language he respects, because he thinks he owns it." She drifted like someone used to rooms that gleam. Lila Beaumont was composed, a little bored. She let conversations circle and collapse, let men with cufflinks worth her mother's car list their pedigrees. She gave just enough, smart references, a few cutting observations about market volatility, a controlled smile when Blackwood finally turned toward her, as if chosen by fate. "You have a brilliant mind, Miss Beaumont," he said, and his gaze slid like oil. "I prefer brilliant returns, Mr. Blackwood," she said crisply. "Good," Cassian's voice hummed. "He's hooked. Keep him talking deals, not dinner." Blackwood's smile widened. "A transaction of this magnitude deserves privacy," he said smoothly. "My suite upstairs is quieter." Fear coiled cold and hard inside her, and then burned away, replaced by anger and purpose. "Your call," Cassian whispered. "You don't have to go." "I know," she whispered back, then looked at Blackwood and gave him a smile that promised everything and meant nothing. "Lead the way." The suite was too gold, too plush, a stage lit for a scene she'd never agree to. He locked the door, the sound bloomed in her ears. He poured whiskey she didn't want. He leaned in close enough to breathe her perfume, close enough to menace. "You remind me of a little waitress," he said, like he was testing her skin for flinches. "Pretty, proud. I wonder what happened to her." Her blood ran cold. He knew, or suspected. His hand closed around her wrist, the other slid to her upper arm, squeezing like he owned muscle and not just air. "Tell me who you are," he growled. "What are you really doing here?" "Cassian," she breathed, calmer than she felt. The line went dead. Static silence. She was alone. The man who had been a strategist in a van became something else entirely when the audio cut. He was out of the van before the team could blink, rage honed to a knife's edge. He took stairs 2 at a time. Doors became inconveniences. Elevators were for men who had the luxury of waiting. He hit Blackwood's suite door like a battering ram of intention. Inside, Lila held her chin high. "Let go," she said, voice low and dangerous. "Now." "I don't think so," Blackwood sneered. "You and your doctor lover have made a hobby of crossing me." The door exploded inward in a rain of splinters. Cassian stood in the wreckage of it, chest heaving, eyes bright as a predator's in a forest fire. He didn't raise his voice. He stepped into the room like the danger had switched allegiance. "Blackwood," he said, voice quiet as a blade. You have 5 seconds to take your hands off her. Maybe it was the look in his eyes. Maybe it was the kind of math a man who survives rooms like this can do quickly. 2 men, 1 door, and the knowledge that your empire stands on matchsticks if the wrong words leak out. Blackwood released her. She moved away, every nerve screaming and every muscle proud. "This is a private conversation," Blackwood blustered, scrambling to collect his power like dropped coins. "It's over," Cassian said. "My attorneys have been listening for an hour. Your admissions are already on file with the SEC. By morning, your accounts will be a glacier, solid, immovable. You're finished." The color drained out of Blackwood's face. No words, just the crumble in a man who learned, too late, what it feels like to slip on his own oil. Cassian turned to Lila, his gaze sweeping her as if inventorying bones and breath. "Let's go," he said, hand gentle where Blackwood's had bruised. They didn't speak until the cold quiet of the underground garage wrapped around them. The adrenaline wore off and left a raw, trembling aftermath in its place. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice a little broken, a little boy and a lot man. "I'm okay," she said. Not okay at all, shaking like a leaf in a gust. He cupped her cheek, thumb catching a tear she hadn't noticed escaping. His composure cracked. Fear flooded his face, making him look like someone who'd finally found what he was terrified to lose. "I thought I'd lost you," he said, the words scraping out of him like an extraction. "When the audio cut, when I didn't know if you, none of it mattered. Not the investigation, not the money, not any contract, just you." He drove not to Halespire, but to the crooked-limbed comfort of her old apartment building. He parked a block away and stared at his hands on the steering wheel like he was surprised to find them there. "The contract is done," he said quietly. "You're free. I'll continue covering your mother's care, but you don't owe me anything, not your presence, not your pretend, nothing." He didn't look at her as he said the last thing, as if letting someone go was work you did alone. "Go be happy, Lila," he whispered, and it sounded like prayer and punishment at once. Her apartment smelled like lavender spray and old paperbacks, a scent that should have comforted and did not. Freedom sat on the couch and felt like an empty room with a clock ticking too loudly. She visited her mother every day. Recovery brought color back into her mother's face and steel back into her voice. It took exactly 1 afternoon of Lila trying to change the subject before her mother squeezed her hand and asked the question gentlest and true. "You love him, don't you?" "It's complicated," Lila said, staring at the floor as if an answer might be written there. "It isn't," her mother said, chuckling softly at her daughter's stubbornness. "I saw the way he looked at you. Not like a doctor, like a man who'd found something and couldn't believe he deserved to keep it." Lila thought of Cassian's backlit figure against the window, of his eyes after the door splintered in the hotel, of his mouth when he'd told her she was free. She thought about who she'd become in the months since she'd walked into a wedding and been told to go around back. Someone who could stand in a man's office and demand the truth. Someone who'd walked into danger with an earpiece and an alias, and walked out with her chin high. She had traded being small for bravery. A new kind of hope edged its way in and felt like a decision rather than a wish. She kissed her mother's cheek. "I'll be back in an hour," she promised, and left before fear could find its argument. Halespire's private elevator hummed like a secret she was allowed to hear. She used the keycard she had not returned, and was grateful for every bit of wrongness about that. Cassian stood at the floor-to-ceiling window in his office, harbor view spread out beneath him, a grid of light and longing. The glass of whiskey in his hand trembled just enough that she saw it. "I don't want to be free," she said, her voice gentle from the door. He turned like a man who knew better than to believe in ghosts, and yet here one was, alive and determined. "Lila," he said, and it sounded like her name was an answer. "Not if it means without you." She walked to him slowly, fear and certainty making a braid in her chest. "Tear up the contract," she said, lifting her hand to his cheek, cool skin under her palm. "Let's write our own." Then she kissed him. Not the brand he'd pressed in public, not the almost kiss thunder had stolen. This was choice, naked and defiant and warm. For a heartbeat, shock froze him. Then he thawed all at once, and the sound he made was something like relief and home. He wrapped her up and lifted her, and for once the penthouse didn't feel like a museum. It felt like a door opened to a room where two people fit. The kiss deepened, lengthened, turned into something that made rules laugh and burn up. Titles fell away. They were not surgeon and staff, not contract and clause. Simply a man and a woman who had worn masks long enough to be tired of makeup. 6 months later, the air in the garden behind a tiny coastal chapel smelled of roses and grass, of summer-fattened sunlight slipping through oak leaves. Lila stood where she'd once felt like an imposter and now felt claimed. Her dress wasn't about price. It was about the way Cassian's face changed when he looked at her in it. The guest list was small. Just the people whose love had proven itself in the space between words. Her mother, healthy and radiant, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief and laughed when Mrs. Whitcomb slipped her another tissue like a conspirator. Cassian stood opposite Lila, transformed not by suit but by softness. The old armor gleamed somewhere far away in a closet. Today he wore skin and heart, and a look that made Lila's throat ache. When it was time to speak, they didn't recite poetry written by strangers. They told the truth they'd shaped with fire and patience and choice. "Lila," Cassian began, hand steady around hers, "I offered you a contract to save myself from all the things that had cut me. I thought I could buy smooth edges, but you, your grit, your grace, your stubborn heart, saved me from the cold room I'd built around my life. You taught me that the risk worth taking is letting someone in." He smiled, and it was gentle. "My vow to you isn't a clause. It's a promise to wake up every day and deserve the man you already see." Tears were not a surprise when they came. Lila laughed through them as she began. "You came into my life like a storm," she said, and everyone smiled at the truth of it. "You made an offer meant to fix one thing and broke open everything. You gave my mother her future and me the present I didn't know how to ask for. You showed me a world I thought I had to pretend to be in, and then you showed me the only place I really belong is beside you." She took a breath. Joy gathered and settled like a bird finding its branch. "I promised to see through your masks and love the man underneath, to challenge you, to hold you, to build a life that is never pretend." As the sun slid down and gilded the garden, they swayed to a quiet melody only they seemed to hear. No one watched with calculation. No one took photos for magazines. They didn't need witnesses. They needed each other. Cassian lowered his mouth to her ear, and the 4 words that once had been a pact with armor and pretense became the kind of vow people put on rings. "You're with me," he whispered. Lila leaned into him, her heart full and steady. "Always," she said, smiling against his collarbone, and she meant it, all the way down to the place where hope had become home, where loss had made room for truth, where the breakthrough wasn't a moment, but a life laid out in front of them like an open road, theirs to walk together.